We like to think of schools as sanctuaries of logic and bright lights. But schools are also old buildings filled with decades of heavy emotions, repetitive routines, and empty spaces. When the final bell rings and the buses pull away, the atmosphere shifts, the air gets heavier, the silence becomes expectant. Tonight, we look at 3 accounts of school mysteries that were never quite solved. Stories that remind us that some lessons aren't meant to be understood. It was a humid Thursday in Georgia. I was a teaching assistant at a private high school, tasked with organizing the archives in the basement library. By 9 p.m., the only light came from my desk lamp, creating a small island of yellow in a sea of shadows. I was cataloging old student journals from the 1920s, brittle, yellowed things that smelled of cedar and dust. I found a leather-bound book that didn't have a name on the spine. I opened it, expecting more penmanship practice. Instead, the pages were filled with a strange, shimmering silver ink. It looked wet, reflecting my lamplight like a mirror. The handwriting was erratic, sprawling across the lines. "He is measuring the hallways again," the first line read. "He says they are getting longer." A chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning crept up my spine. I looked toward the exit. The hallway outside the archive room usually felt short, 10 paces to the elevator. But tonight, the motion sensor lights flickered on, one by one, stretching much further than they should. The perspective seemed warped, like looking through a fisheye lens. I heard a rhythmic clink, clink, clink. It was the sound of a metal surveyor's tape hitting the floor. It was coming from the darkness at the end of the unnaturally long hallway. I retreated into the archives, my heart hammering. I looked back at the journal on my desk. A new line had appeared in that wet silver ink, right below the others. It was in my own handwriting. "The elevator is too far away now." I didn't use the hallway. I climbed out of a narrow ventilation window into the courtyard and didn't stop running until I reached my car. The next morning, I returned with the head librarian. The hallway was its normal length. The basement was dry. But when I went to show him the journal, the leather book was gone. In its place was a single strip of old metal measuring tape, coiled on my desk. It was exactly 3 inches long, and it was covered in wet silver ink. I was part of the student council at a centuries-old boarding school in Vermont. We were preparing for the centennial anniversary, which meant cleaning the Wall of History, a long corridor lined with framed group photos of every graduating class since 1924. It was my job to polish the glass and ensure the names matched the faces. I was working on the class of 1958. It was a standard black and white shot, rows of grim-faced boys in blazers. But as I wiped the dust away, I noticed a girl. She was standing in the very back row, tucked between 2 tall boys. She was wearing a dress that seemed too dark for the film, and she was the only one looking directly at the camera. Everyone else was looking slightly to the left. The next day, I moved on to the class of 1972. I stopped, the rag frozen in my hand. There she was again. The same girl, same dark dress, same piercing stare. She hadn't aged a day. I felt a wave of nausea. I ran my hand over the glass, wondering if it was a prank, but the photo was sealed, the edges yellowed with genuine age. I became obsessed. I stayed late to check the other photos. 1985, 1999, 2010. She was in all of them, but she was moving. In the older photos, she was in the back. By the 2000s, she was in the middle row. In the most recent photo from last year, she was standing in the front row, her hand resting on the shoulder of the class president. I took the 1958 photo down to look at the back for a name. There was a list of students typed on an old typewriter. At the very bottom, a name had been added in faint pencil: the guest. That night, as I walked past the wall of history to go home, I glanced at the empty frame I'd left on the floor. The glass was shattered. When I looked at the 2024 class photo, the one we had just taken that morning, there was an empty space in the front row where I was supposed to be standing. And next to that empty space, a girl in a dark dress was looking directly at me, her hand reaching out into the empty air. The school was empty for winter break. I was a security guard, 20 years old, taking the night shift to pay for college. The silence of a school at 3 a.m. is different than any other silence. It's a waiting silence. My rounds took me through the locker bays of the North Wing. As I passed locker 302, I felt a low vibration in my feet. Not a mechanical hum, but a pulse, like a slow, heavy heartbeat. I put my ear to the metal. It was warm, unnaturally warm for a building where the heat had been turned down to 50 degrees. Inside, I could hear a sound like someone breathing through a wet cloth. I shouldn't have opened it, but the heat coming from the metal was starting to blister the paint. I used my master key. The door didn't swing open, it resisted, as if something inside was holding the handle. I jerked it hard. The locker was empty. No books, no coats, just a dark, rectangular void. But the back of the locker, the solid steel wall, was missing. In its place was a narrow, dark tunnel that smelled of damp earth and old copper. I shone my flashlight into the hole. It went back for miles, far beyond the thickness of the wall. At the very end of the light's reach, I saw something move. It was a small, pale hand waving slowly. Then, a voice drifted out of the tunnel. It wasn't a scream or a growl. It was a teacher's voice, calm and monotone, reciting a math equation I remembered from 3rd grade. I slammed the locker shut and locked it. I stayed in the security office for the rest of the night, watching the cameras. Locker 302 never opened again. When the janitors arrived in the morning, I had them inspect it. They found the locker perfectly normal, solid steel back, no heat, no tunnel. But as they walked away, I noticed something on the floor. A trail of small, damp footprints leading away from the locker, disappearing into the middle of the hallway, as if whoever made them had simply stepped upward into nothing. There is a specific kind of dread that comes from realizing the places we know best can become completely foreign in the blink of an eye. We trust the walls and the floors to stay where they are, but perhaps they only do so because we are watching. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you have a story that keeps you up at night, tell me about it in the comments and let me know what city or country you're listening to tonight. It's always good to know who is out there in the dark. If you want to hear more, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell. There are many more hallways to walk down. Be safe and try to get some rest.